Well, how about we go back to San Francisco, North Beach? And I mean, actually can fill in a little beyond that.
Yeah.
I predominantly of Italian descent on my father's side, and 100% from the Tuscany region, or excuse me, that's my mother's side. My father's side from Chiavari in Italy, came over in the late 1800s and early 1900s, settled in San Francisco. And then on my father's side, my grandfather, John, who I was named after, went to San Pedro. So my father grew up in Southern California. Did not know my mother until World War II when he was in the Air Force, and met my mother through his cousin who lived in North Beach. In Italian families, I could get going here and not stop. But my mother was, her parents were from the Tuscany region of Italy, or her grandparents, I should say. She has a little Irish and Portuguese, so we have a nice collection of ethnic background, I should say. But I was born in North Beach. My great-grandfather had some flats up on Mason and Green. And well, I think it was about 4 or 5 years old, we moved to Marin County. That was kind of the traditional thing for Italian families. You kind of get a foothold, and then you move to the more rural, at that time, Marin County, more rural environment. And so I actually grew up in Marin County. But we've stayed connected to those, you know, our Italian background. In fact, I've had the opportunity to take my kids and all of us go to Italy and visit some of the places where my family was from.
What did your dad do for a living?
My dad was a teamster in San Francisco after the war. Back in the day when you could make a good living as a teamster, he worked in, it was the automotive business, and he did parts deliveries and worked automotive counter, you know, selling to all the big Chevrolet dealerships, et cetera. And made a living doing that, commuted from Marin County on the Greyhound bus every day, worked long hours.
Your mom, she worked?
Yes, she did work. She raised 3 boys.
Oh, yeah.
So she, unfortunately, she passed away in 1967. She was 43 years old, pretty young. But she was a stay-at-home mom and worked extremely hard.
So when you moved over here, where did you live?
Fairfax.
Okay.
Fairfax. In fact, Fairfax, the area, manor area of Fairfax was known as Little Italy. And a lot of Italian families from San Francisco had summer homes and then slowly moved to that area and settled there. We lived right down from St. Rita's Church. Of course, if you're Italian, we were Italian Catholic. And my dad built a nice little home, small by today's standards, but a wonderful little home on the hillside in Fairfax. And that's where I grew up.
So your schooling is what?
Well, started out in Manor School, and when St. Rita's opened, my parents shifted me to St. Rita's. My older brother remained in the public school, but I think they thought I needed a little more work. So I went to St. Rita's, then I went to Marin Catholic for 4 years, and then I went to community college for a couple of years, College of Marin. And then I went to Santa Barbara in a marine technology program. I was interested in diving and biology and whatnot. Decided I wanted to teach and transferred to San Jose State, and did 2 years at San Jose State, got a degree in life sciences, biology. And then I went to San Francisco State for a year of graduate school, and I was going to teach. That was the plan. And coach baseball.
Okay.
That was the plan.
All right. And what changed those plans?
When I got out of college in the 70s, early 70s, 1970, we were going through a bit of a recession. Teachers were being laid off. There weren't any teaching jobs available. So I went to work driving a truck. I should back up and say during my college years, and even in high school, I worked in the grocery business in Fairfax as a grocery clerk. Then I moved furniture, drove a truck. That's how I got through college. And they were great work experiences. So when I got out of college, no teaching jobs, I just went to work for a company called Trombetta. Started driving a truck, delivering wine and beer, was enjoying it. In fact, making some pretty good money as a Teamster. And the transition in my life started to happen at that point. My wife and I had moved back from San Jose. I got married in 1970, and we had moved back from San Jose. I was going to San Francisco State and working during the day, and we moved back to Fairfax in a little apartment.
How did you meet your wife?
I met her in community college. I did not know her in high school. She was from Sleepy Hollow, Signey, and at College of Marin, we met.
And got married when you were down in San Jose?
We got married. I had 1 year of college left. We got married, and actually less than a year of college left, and finished up school in San Jose. We lived down there in a little apartment, and then came back to Fairfax, as I said. And 40 years later, same lady, and I'm a lucky guy.
So you're driving a truck?
I'm driving a truck.
Wine, and then what happens?
Well, again, a little background. In 1965, when I graduated from high school and turned 18, I had an older brother, Bert. He was a volunteer firefighter, and when I turned 18, I became a volunteer firefighter.
Where?
Fairfax Fire Department. Fairfax Fire Wardens is what we were called. And in that day, it was sort of like going out for sports. My brother did it. I had a couple of other friends who were doing it, and it was kind of an exciting thing, being in the fire service. And, you know, it wasn't that I really said, geez, I want to be a firefighter. It was a nice community thing. It was a little excitement. I had friends doing it. It was a big volunteer program. So I joined in 1965. So I spent a lot of time as a volunteer firefighter. In fact, I stayed a volunteer firefighter for 25 years, even concurrent with my professional career. And so I had that connection. So now, moved to 1970, I'm driving a truck. My older brother is now a professional firefighter in Fairfax. He's a full-time firefighter. And he said, John, why don't you, teaching jobs aren't very good. He goes, you really ought to think about the fire department. And I said, well, I was a volunteer. He said, why don't you just take some tests, you like it, you like all the people, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I don't know, it'd be a pretty significant cut in pay. I'm driving a truck delivering beer and wine, and I was making more money than firefighters were making. But it kind of struck a chord. I liked the people, I liked the environment, but it wasn't my driving passion in terms of becoming a firefighter for a career. But sort of, I said, you know what, I'll take the test. So I took a couple of tests, Sausalito and Kentfield. And I actually was offered jobs in both. So it was like, whoa. I guess, I had a college degree, and I think back then that was sort of a new phenomenon in the fire service. And so it gave me an opportunity. As I said, I was offered the jobs, and I chose Kentfield. It was closer to Fairfax, I guess a comfortable feeling with knowing the communities. And I actually decided, okay, I'm going to try this out.
So when you
Can we cut for a second? I'm sorry, Chase. There's a squeeze.
John, let's back up and now get back to Fairfax. Who was the fire chief at the time you became a volunteer?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Just a wonderful guy, Charlie Thornton. He was the chief I knew. When I started as a volunteer firefighter, he was the chief and had been a chief for a number of years. And don't ask me the date he started, but he was a long-time Fairfax resident. And one of those people that made an impact in my life, a man of integrity. As a young person at the time, I would have said, oh, he's a bit of a fuddy-duddy, and, But I tell you what, as time went on, I began to understand what kind of a quality person he was. He cared about the community, the fire service, and his people. And what a great thing for me to have had that experience with him.
So now you're hired at Kentfield, and who's the fire chief at that?
Kenny Camp. Kenny Camp, another great guy. The day I got the call from Kentfield, the telephone rings. This is after I'd done my, you know in the fire service where you do the written test, the physical, the oral interviews, you have your medical check, even back then you had to go to the doctor and have a medical exam and whatnot. And it was a Saturday, and if I could just interject something, concurrent with me being offered that job, my wife informed me that we had a little one on the way, my son Todd. So it was a pretty exciting time. I got the call on a Saturday, the phone rings, and on the other end, someone says, "Hey, Guy." And I didn't recognize the voice, and I said, "Hello, who is this?" He goes, "This is Chief Camp." I go, and now I'm thinking, if you guys knew my older brother, excuse me, you know that there's a good possibility there's a prank about to take place. So I'm a little suspicious. "Hello, Chief." He goes, "How would you like a job?" But his casual commentary on the phone just kind of threw me. I'm thinking, would they do it this way? And I go, "Is this really Chief Camp?" He goes, "Yeah, Guy." And for those of you who know Kenny, that was his kind of earmark. "Hey, Guy." And well, I said, "Okay." I think he thought, what's the matter with this guy? He seems hesitant. And I did explain to him later why that I was concerned that my brother was pranking me. But
Okay, now you're in Kentfield. Tell us the sequence of events, how you moved your way up to become chief.
Okay. Well, I had great opportunities. Worked for wonderful people. You can't talk about the sequence of events without mentioning the people. And the people go beyond Kentfield. Bob Mariani was a shift-working assistant chief and a training officer. And he was just remarkable. His thing was training. Train. In fact, I bristle when people talk about firefighters. "Oh, and you guys get to sit around." And I go, "Yeah? What fire department are you talking about?" Because Bob Mariani had us out on the training ground constantly. To the point where it was like, oh my God, I know how to do this stuff, Chief. What? But he just insisted on that. So that kind of mentality got drummed in. And at the time, not only Bob Mariani, but Jimmy Berthenier, Gene Lestinier, Chief Berthenier from the Nevada Fire, Gene Lestinier, Captain Fairfax. There was just this core of people that were really involved in training and just doing a great job, I think, and Bill Ellis, for young firefighters. So I think I was so fortunate to get into that environment and start off the right way. So I stayed a firefighter for 3 years. We had a sequence where you moved up to firefighter 1, 2, 3, and then engineer, and you had to do a little testing and step into it. But you didn't have a choice. You moved up to engineer, and you were expected to be an engineer in 3.5 years. Sequentially after that, in the fire service, in small communities, you play different roles. You're a firefighter, and you may do fire prevention work. You may do training work, but you don't have we didn't have a separate position that just dealt with that. I had the opportunity to start doing a little fire prevention work. I worked with a fellow by the name of Dean Thompson, who left the fire service and became a chiropractor, but he was really involved in fire prevention and was the fire marshal in Kentfield. And when he left, that position opened up, and I was interested in it. It was technical, and I thought it was fun. And again, there was a great group of people in the community, fire service community in Marin County, who were involved in fire prevention. Bill, yourself, obviously, and George Hedema. And I just remember getting involved with all of you folks in fire investigations, and it really just, maybe I have a little bit of an academic background, so I just kind of took to it. I really enjoyed that. So there was another avenue that opened up. I mean, so when Dean left, I became the fire prevention officer. And then shortly after that, we used to have a position, a lieutenant's position. And I was actually appointed to that because I had the qualifications to move right into it. I didn't take a test for it. I mean, it was the fire district board appointed me to it. And things kind of cascaded from there. I mean, the next captain's position was available. I took the test for that, and I got to be a captain. I continued doing the fire prevention work and also training work. You know, small district, you do everything. From there, the next step was battalion chief. We moved to a battalion chief slot, and it just, you know, I found everything really interesting. You know, all the academy classes that came up, I always, every year I'd take 2 or 3 classes just because I was interested in and some great people teaching them. I just wanted to be a part of that, you know. And so consequently, I think those things were just available to me because it was interesting. I moved forward. After battalion chief, I still was the fire marshal at the time. Then I had the title fire marshal. I became deputy chief when Kenny Camp retired, and Bob Mariani became the chief. And deputy chief I was promoted to chief. The board offered me the job.
When did you get promoted to chief?
Okay, Bill. Approximately 1992. Let's see, let me do the math. I spent 10, 11, 12 years, about 92, I think it was. I served as chief for 11 years, 12 years before I retired.
When you were the chief, you belonged to certain associations?
Oh, sure, yeah. I really enjoyed that. Cal Fire Chiefs, Western Fire Chiefs, NFPA, Marin County Fire Chiefs Association. We had a great group, worked closely together. Fire prevention officers, fire investigation officers, you know, all of the sections, Marin County sections.
When you were fire chief, tell us about some of the activities that took place at the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association level.
Well, actually, we became very active. There were some big initiatives going on. One of them was the Fire Flow Initiative, and that was highly political. In that, not on our part so much, but in that the Marin Municipal Water District needed to do many improvements in water system, seismic, fire flow, and just water quality, and wanted an initiative to get it rolling. Well, as you know, there's always politics. You know, where are you spending your money? How are you spending your money? Why do you need more money? Well, they asked the Marin County Fire Chiefs to get on board because we carried some weight with respect to talking to the public. We were an organization that the public respected and listened to, as opposed to listening to political bodies. And hopefully that's still the way it is today. So I took on the Fire Flow Committee. I thought it was really important, and spent a lot of time in that with other fire chiefs. I mean, Bob Marcucci and Terry Kildow. I'm going to leave people out, so I better not go any farther on that. But
what were the results of that?
The result was the initiative passed, and significant improvements have been made to our water system through Marin Municipal Water District, seismic, fire flow, water quality. Every year, lots and lots of new water mains are put in or upgraded and improved, water tanks, et cetera. So, and that continues to this day. That money is still being spent. It was my recollection serves me, about $60 million So that was a big project, and I spent a lot of time on it. I went all over the county talking to different, public groups and talking about the need to do this project, and politics aside, so I became a spokesman for that.
Speaking of the politics indirectly, what would you consider some of your biggest challenges when you were the fire chief?
The politics. I wasn't very good at it. I mean, when I say I wasn't good at it, I mean, I probably mean I didn't care for it that much. I think in the fire service, we're sort of operational people. We get it done. I mean, we look at the task, we figure out how to do it, and we implement. And I wasn't really used to having to deal with different agendas that weren't on point. So I would say clearly that was my biggest frustration. And that's the way it is. I understand that now. You have to get a little older and understand, okay, that's the world.
You board of directors?
I worked for board of directors, spent an awful lot of time with the Marin County Board of Supervisors, because ultimately they're kind of the regulatory body for fire districts, but the fire district has its own board elected from the community. So I answered directly to them. But my interface went to the county continuously for many, many projects.
So you dealt directly with the supervisor that represented your area?
That's correct.
Who was?
That was Hal Brown. I dealt with Hal continuously on many, many issues. And then the whole board, of course, the whole board of supervisors when those issues got to their level.
Tell us about some of the professional associations that you were part of, you joined or participated in.
Well, I mean, the one I enjoyed the most was the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association. I enjoyed working with my colleagues. We didn't always agree on things, but that would be my fondest memory of organizations. But I worked with, outside of that, I was on you talk about projects, this is organization and projects, the Marin Emergency Radio Authority. I was on the executive board of that organization when we got our radio system involved. I was on FARA, executive board, and president of FARA, which is a joint powers agreement amongst California fire districts, whereby we provided insurance. So it was a self-insurance pool for fire districts. And I served on that for, well, the entire time I was fire chief. And as I said, I was a president of that for several years. That was really interesting, really informative. I really understood, or began to understand, the nature of risk management and how important it was to the fire service. So it's that connection to the private sector and understanding private sector concepts and business criteria and merging those with the fire service. So I think it was very beneficial to me and to the fire district to have those experiences and bring them in. Another organization, before we leave this, fire prevention organization in Marin County, the fire prevention section was wonderful. I mean, I met some of my closest friends, Chief Bliss, Tiburon Fire, Chief Sennett, Larkspur Fire. We were all about the same age and worked together in fire prevention, and we're all fire marshals. And in fact, it was kind of a running joke about how many fire chiefs came out of the fire marshal rank or fire prevention world as opposed to training officers. And we would tease our training officer friends mercilessly because we had this big group that came from fire prevention.
When you were fire chief, what were some of the significant changes you think you observed and can relate to that while you were chief?
I would say you have to kind of spread it out through the entire career, but when I came into the fire service, it was significantly based on a community concept. There was a large social element to the fire service because you had this community volunteer firefighter group. So if we take it from 1970 and then move forward to 20 years later that I became fire chief, the change in the community impacted the fire service. And I think it was kind of fully realized that 20 years later. And that change is that communities became more mobile, less centralized. People didn't work in the community that they lived in so much. People commuted. So the volunteer aspect started to be diffused and much more difficult to manage. People became more, that's a service, we're paying for it oriented. The fire service kind of adjusted to that. And as I said, we trained like crazy when I started, but the difference between when I started training in fireground operations evolved to significant EMS training, hazardous material training. All facets of our profession just expanded, and the training criteria expanded with it, and the professional requirements expanded with it. And the nature of our relationship with our public changed significantly. The public was starting to view us as not the good old guys that hung around in the fire station and, you know, washed the fire trucks, but as truly professionals that delivered a high level of service for many, many types of emergency incidents. So that relationship changed, and I think that when I became a fire chief, I think it kind of was really home. And the other thing I would add to that is the adoption of technology. We moved from a pretty thorough paper administration system to technology, to computers. And that was shocking for a lot of firefighters who were still transitioning, the older guys that were still in the fire service and transitioning out. So all of these new training standards and requirements and this technology really came home probably, maybe I'll say mid-'80s through my time as a fire chief until I retired. And of course, it hasn't stopped.
A question I'd like to ask you is, all the fire departments in Marin County are losing their volunteers, with the exception of Kentfield. Kentfield still have a core of volunteers, and can you explain why? What does Kentfield do different to maintain that core of volunteers when everyone else is kind of dismissing theirs?
It's commitment. It's commitment in even in the face of maybe some realities that don't support that sort of an environment anymore, volunteer environment. I mean, I have something to say about that whole volunteer thing. I mean, I served as a volunteer firefighter with my professional career. I remained a volunteer firefighter in Fairfax for 25 years. And here's how it changed. I already talked about community changing. People becoming more mobile and people not able to make the commitment, even at the original level commitment. And as the training standards changed, the commitment became more and more demanding. And here's something else that changed, and I like to tell this story, and I've told it many times. When I became a volunteer firefighter, I worked in a little grocery store in town. This is 1966, okay? And when the alarm went off, it was an air horn, and it was a coded air horn. The manager of the store, a little local grocery store, Jolly Market, would come to those of us, my brother, myself. He knew we were volunteers. He goes, "Hey, you guys got a call." We would take off the smock, out, and respond to the alarm. We'd go to the fire station, okay? Within a couple of years, Jolly Market had sold out to a bigger grocery store chain. The alarm comes in. The new manager, great guy, this is not faulting him. Smocks come off, we're heading for the door. Do you work here or do you work there? The attitude changed. Now that's not me being negative about that new manager and that new system. That's what was happening in the world. That same community commitment was changing. Another quick example. When you'd go to the theater in town,
the theater manager knew who you were and see you in line out there to get your ticket and come and grab you and say, no, no, open up the door. So the old comp theater ticket, people think, oh, you guys are lucky. No, that was a community spirit. That was a community thing. That theater manager knew you were a volunteer firefighter and kind of took you by the ear, put you in a seat. In those days, you had lounge seats, so it was kind of cool. You had to pay extra for them. Put you in that seat, and then when an alarm came in, if you happened to be in the theater at the time, would come and get you and say, you guys got a call. That was the environment. Now that changed as communities became more mobile and people didn't have those same connections. I think that illustrates sort of the beginning of a change in concepts. Jump forward to Kentfield, how do we do it?
Can we cut? Thanks. I have somebody. Anytime.
John, continue on why Kentfield's still outstanding.
Well, again, it's a commitment. It's really an above and beyond commitment. The core of the volunteer program is, of course, the cadet program. We have bunks in the firehouse whereby people who are wanting to become professional firefighters and enrolled in Firefighter 1 or Fire Academy classes and going to community college can apply and actually get a bunk. And they get a lot of training, and it's, if you look at the history of Kentfield, we have literally hundreds of people throughout the state of California, out of the state of California, Boston Fire Department, et cetera, that came through our program. It's extraordinary. It's a commitment. And if you look at a cost evaluation, probably not effective. We spend a whole lot more time training and working with those folks than we benefit from them. But it's just been a commitment, and it's sort of one of the traditional things. It's one of the things we do and continue to do, to give.
As I said, Kentfield is very unique in that, in today, 2011, to still maintain that.
Yeah, you know, and again, if you did a cost-benefit analysis, a bean counter looked at it, they'd probably say, why are you doing that? You know, it's, but.
Would you say you had a mentor when you were coming through?
Oh,
as
my
fire
God.
Chief, you know, once you became chief, there was another chief you could pick up the phone and ask a question of?
Much broader than that, Bill. I mean, mentors come in all sizes and shapes. I mean, I would count you as one of them. People that you knew, that you wanted to emulate, that you admired because of their work ethic, their intellect, their dedication. I mentioned Charlie Thornton. I mean, he was always a mentor. Even though he retired and I moved away and we didn't communicate a lot, he was always here. I always remembered how he treated people. I always remembered his integrity. Gene Lestinier, captain in Fairfax. Yeah, absolutely. Even though professionally in the fire service, we moved away from them. They retired, and but they were always here. George Hedema. Closer to home, when I was a fire chief, who did I talk to? I think I had the good fortune of talking to all the fire chiefs. I always kind of felt that I had a little bit of a unique role in the fire service. I always felt I was sort of a bridge. There were two groups. There were the older group of fire chiefs that were kind of looking and saying, who are these kids, and well, geez, I mean, I was wearing a sport coat and a shirt and tie to work a lot. I wasn't wearing a uniform because I was interfacing with different, hospital board, and so I needed to kind of fit in on a business level. And I know a lot of people saying, what's with this? It was kind of a change in the fire service. But there was this transition going on, and I always felt that I was kind of a bridge between an older generation of fire chief and firefighter that were slowly evolving out, and this newer generation that were coming in. And I just felt like that. I had these hands out there like this, like, oh, no. Because they were ready to go at each other. And I like both groups. In terms of mentor, I strayed away from the question. I work closely with Rosemary Bliss, and Bob Sinnott, Ron Zeise, another wonderful guy, Mike Grishong. These are Ross Valley Fire Chiefs that and you know, Ron has since passed away. People I got to work closely with on the Rossville Lake Paramedic Board. So I just was surrounded by really good people and enjoyed working with them. So Bob Sennett and I mean, daily, we'd pick the phone up and whine or complain about issues, and Bob Fox in Corte Madera. I guess Ron Zeise was, for the time that I worked with him, was a real, I mean, he was a little older than me, had experiences outside of Marin County, was just an interesting guy, smart guy. I'd put him in that category. And some of the retired fire chiefs, Jim Berthenier, other people like that I'd be able to talk to. And
I'd like to back up a little bit, getting back to your family. I understand you have a family member that's in the fire service.
my son was in the fire service. He's no longer in the fire service. He had a real tragic accident a couple of years ago and had to leave the fire service. He's doing great today. He's one of these highly inventive technological people involved in computers, and so he's kind of rebuilding, or has rebuilt his career. A very difficult time for him and the whole family, but he's doing great.
During your career, what would you consider one of the most largest incidents, most challenging incidents that you were involved in versus strike team in the county, out of the county?
Well, I mean, I guess you would think, I mean, I was a division chief on the Oakland fire. I was a strike team on a number of campaign fires in the state of California. And you'd think, well, that would be the most challenging, but you know, you got an action plan from the command post, and you knew what you were going to do and what you could do. And
How was the Oakland incident? What was that all about?
frustrating, frustrating and instructive. I want to be careful on how I talk about it. What you think is not always true. The stories, the legends, etc. When you were there and you actually saw them, and then you hear the stories later, you scratch your head and you say, were we at the same incident? You know? And I guess there was a big disappointment there. I knew this before the Oakland fire, but it just kind of brought it home. And that is, you would think that communications and coordination would have been a lot more evolved in some of the larger agencies around the Bay Area. And it was disappointing to find that they were struggling. I think coming from a smaller agency, as we do in Marin County, we worked together better. We knew we had to communicate with people. We had to reach out. Even as isolationist as some small communities were back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you know, we don't need any help kind of an attitude. Mutual aid, automatic aid, communications, radio communications. I began to realize we're a lot more evolved and more sophisticated in the sense that we worked at it than some of our larger colleagues from other areas, for example.
Let's say a new fire chief comes to you today, just been appointed fire chief. What kind of advice would you give, knowing your history versus what you think the future is going to look like for a new fire chief being appointed today?
Boy, I tell you what, I mean, be true to yourself and hang on to integrity. Don't be swayed. Don't be swayed by the political environment in the sense that you got to say things to make people happy. Be tactful, but don't be swayed. Don't change who you are. Remain true to what you believe in, what you've evolved through as a young firefighter. Also, I would say you need to be conservative in the sense that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because you have certain sectors that are going to say, oh, we got to change this, we got to change that. But you've got to be progressive in the sense that when you see a need to change, and it's genuine, that you do it conservatively, but you move through and make the changes, and don't become a victim of that old saying in the fire service, 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. So be ready to move forward and be a change agent, but do it conscientiously.
When did you decide to retire?
2002, 2003, I worked an additional year even after I retired. At that point in time, I had been really spearheading, as I mentioned, the fire flow and the Marin Emergency Radio Authority, working with FARA. I had really branched outside of my organization and brought a lot of the stuff home for us. And I was getting tired. I had my hands out and doing a lot of things, and then bringing new technology into the fire service and managing that change. I had good people, and I felt that I had brought about significant changes in our own organization, and that it was time to settle a little bit and let those changes really take hold, let that become part of who they were. And I just kind of felt like, okay, I don't know what it was. It was tough to leave, but I kind of knew. I've always felt that, leaders need to get it. We get kind of caught up in ourselves. Oh boy, what are they going to do without me? No, actually, there's a point in time when it's time to say, you know what? They need to see another face. They need to, to move on from me. Not that I wasn't relevant. I'm proud of the fact that I think I was relevant right up to the last day I worked. But I just...
Do you ever get back to Kentfield?
I was very cautious about hanging out down there, not hanging out. I have such close friends. In fact, it was a bit painful because I wanted people to know that, hey, I haven't forgotten about you. But I've always gone back to our, installation dinners. I'll drop by the firehouse and say hi to the shifts occasionally. But you have to be real careful when you're a fire chief who retired, because people, will say, "Oh, geez, chief, what do you think about?" And I didn't want to get there. You cannot undermine the person who's now filling that position. And I may not agree. Maybe I think the person shouldn't be making the changes they're making, but boy, you can't undermine it. You really have to watch how you do it. So I wanted to let people know, hey, I care about you, I haven't forgotten about you, and I haven't just walked out the door. But on the other hand, you got to give the new guy the space, and the new guy is my close friend and is doing a wonderful job. So
what are you doing these days to keep busy? Are you traveling?
I actually was doing some consulting work, but in the last year, I've kind of moved away from that. I have too many hobbies. My son and I love to fly fish. My daughter does too.
What is your daughter?
My daughter she's followed in her mother's footsteps, Stephanie, who's 26, and getting married in June. Is a ballet teacher at Marin Ballet. My wife has been a ballet instructor at Marin Ballet and was a dancer for over 25 years now. So she's following in her footsteps and loves teaching. They work with younger kids, and it's amazing what they do. So
You travel much?
we have traveled a little bit, small stuff. I ski. That's my passion during the wintertime. I just love it. Have a great group of friends who all happen to ski, so I think maybe that's what pulled me into it. So we go to different places during the wintertime, and we'll rent a house, and several couples will get together, and we ski for a week here or there. I've always enjoyed building things. I built my house, so I'm involved in construction stuff. As I see myself as the typical old Italian guy now out in the garden. I love it. I just I can fill a day up and just like that.
Life is good.
Life is good. Loving it.
Well, John, thanks very much for coming down and talking to us today.
I'll just throw one
My
more.
pleasure.
I'll throw one more in just for fun. I always ask this one If magically you could rewind it, would you do it all over again?
Absolutely. I would, the guy who was going to be a biology teacher and a baseball coach listened to his older brother, did the right thing, and it was the best career a guy could have, or a woman.
He also is one